Previously on the Logosians podcast.
Now, Edmund is actually my favorite character, followed closely by Eustace, who are both just insufferable when you get to them. And they're insufferable because when I'm reading them, I see myself as a kid and even myself now.
Yeah, wow. Lewis believed that Christ redeems the myth.
Right.
Like, and I was like, how awesome is that?
Yeah.
That, like, he literally, through Tumnus, uses him as an example of Christ, like, just as you point out, these being echoes of something that exists in another world or whatever, but that Christ is, like, the ultimate redeemer. Like, even that these things that in our world have been used as idols and false things.
And we have the tainted, twisted versions.
We have tainted, twisting things, but they're, in reality, those things still are subservient to Aslan,
right,
or to Jesus, or point to himself.
Edmund was already feeling uncomfortable from having eaten too many sweets, and when he had heard that the lady he had made friends with was a dangerous witch, he felt even more uncomfortable. But he still wanted to taste that Turkish delight again, more than he wanted anything else. So, he's just totally captured in the temptation there. So, chapter 5, back on this side of the door, they come back out of the wardrobe. Again, it's another scene where they're confronted. This time, Edmund and Lucy are confronted by Peter and Susan. And Lucy is, like, so happy. Hey, we've been in there. Edmund went with me. We walked around in Narnia. It's true. Like, I wasn't making it up.
This is arguably the most insufferable moment for me.
Yes.
Of what Edmund does.
Yes.
I just can't like. I don't know. I just can't like Edmund.
I feel like I see myself as a kid.
Here's the deal. There's a reason, and I know we're getting way ahead of ourselves here, but there's a reason why Edmund is presented the way he is, and then is one day crowned King of Narnia, Edmund the Just.
Yeah.
Like, Edmund is us. Edmund is human beings. He literally he made him as insufferable as possible so that Aslan could redeem even him. And that's the point. And not only is he redeemed, like, hey, you're a saint, but he even made him a king. Like, so there's stuff there. So, but yeah, he's insufferable for sure.
Peter says, so is this true, Edmund? Like, what about it? And Edmund gave a very superior look as if he were far older than Lucy. There was really only a year's difference. And then a little snigger and said, oh yes, Lucy and I have been playing, pretending that all her story about a country in the wardrobe is true. Just for fun, of course. There's nothing really there. And this, of course, just obliterates Lucy, who is like the sweetest, most innocent person in the story, easily. And so she runs off, and he says, there she goes again. What's the matter with her? That's the worst of young kids. They always... And then he gets cut off, and, Peter rips him a new one, basically.
Yes,
which he totally deserved. Just, he wasn't having it at all, and they've seen over and over that he's just been absolutely awful this whole time that they've been there. So now Peter and Susan are becoming sort of concerned about this whole situation, Lucy making up these stories, and they go to the professor thinking they're like, so a grown-up can help us sort this out.
He'll give us a really clear and not confusing answer.
Right. And then, so they just explain the story to him, and then he says, how do you know your sister's story isn't true? And it just catches Susan, and she's like, oh, but what? It can't possibly be true. Edmund said they had only been pretending. And he says, that is a point which certainly deserves consideration, very careful consideration. For instance, does your experience lead you to regard your brother or sister as more reliable? And
this whole interaction... I was not expecting that. As a first reader,
I
was like...
They were shook, too, right?
What? I'd have been like, of course she's making up a story. It's a little girl.
Peter and Susan are like, what? I mean, what do you mean? Like, if this is real, like, it can't possibly... It has to be there all the time. And he's like, does it?
Yeah.
And
he's like,
then,
would she lie? And they're like, but
she doesn't lie.
Would she lie? Like,
he is more of the liar. And then they're like, well, we were actually kind of concerned that maybe it wasn't lying, that she had, gone kind of crazy. And he's like, well, you just have to look at her and talk to her to know she's not mad. So, and he says something about, logic. What do they teach in schools these days? There are only 3 possibilities. Either your sister's lying, or mad, or she's telling the truth. She doesn't tell lies, and it's obvious she's not mad. For the moment, then, unless we have some other evidence, we must assume that she is telling the truth. And I find this part really fascinating that, in mere Christianity, you have the trilemma, lunatic, liar, or Lord. Someone that said the things that Jesus did would either be a lunatic on, what do you say, like on the same level as a man who calls himself a poached egg.
Yeah.
He would be a liar on like the same level as the devil of hell.
Yeah.
Or he's actually the Lord.
Yeah.
And he kind of puts this into the story. It's just, it's masterful work.
Yep. And he chose to do it through Lucy's character, which
Yes.
I think is amazing too.
Mm-hmm.
And really quick, before I forget, before we move way too far past it, I wanted to say one more thing about Lucy, because I mentioned earlier, or you had said that, like, in passing, you said, and she's like the sweetest character imaginable. I think there's another theme that is explored in these books, specifically in the book we're reading now, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is encapsulated, is why I actually like the sequence when Tumnus is crying and Lucy is with him. She is so swift to forgive.
Yeah.
Instantly she forgives him. And in this story specifically, and we'll see this later with Aslan himself ultimately portrayed, swift forgiveness is in line with righteousness in these stories as told by Lewis, and that just hit me hard this time. Like, I don't know how quick Lucy was to. He is Tumnus openly admitted that he was not. It's not what I'm going to do or have done. It is what I am doing right now, as I am kidnapping you.
Yeah.
You are being kidnapped.
You are being kidnapped. And Lucy forgives him and says, "Oh no, it's quite all right. No, and
I think you're a really good fawn.
Yeah. No, you're a really good fawn." There is profoundness in that that is so much more powerful than any highbrow stuff we could explore. So, yeah.
Bringing this up actually brings me back to another misconception that I didn't really think to put down on the list, but there's a minority view that. What happens to Susan later in the last battle is that she's not there with them, and it says some stuff about how she's become much more concerned with like lipstick and fashion and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And
which feminists have attacked.
Yeah, people have taken that and they've said like, well, Lewis was like horribly sexist and this is awful. So the best character in the story, besides Aslan, obviously, is Lucy. Yeah. She does the right thing every time.
Yeah, bar none.
Without exception. She is clearly like, she's the moral exemplar in the entire story. So I just don't buy that at all. And there's her, and then there's also Jill that comes in later, who's also a solid character. She's obviously not as good as Lucy overall. She's not in as much of the story. But anyway, that's always bothered me that... Yeah. What a weird, they really got triggered by this one thing that he said about Susan later on in the story.
Lucy is the exemplar in the story of all the siblings, anyways. Yeah. Peter has very obvious failings. Susan has very obvious failings. And, of course, Edmund does. But Lucy does not. Yeah. And most of it is linked to this concept, I think, of just well, I guess you could call it childlike faith, but just this ease that she walks in, and like I said, these kinds of things, swift to forgive, right, and all the things that we know kids are, So and she maintains this as she goes on too.
This thing in the acknowledgement about being too old for fairy tales. Yeah. Susan had gotten to that point where she was too old for fairy tales, and the rest of them never got to that. Yeah. So anyway,
right. Whereas Lucy is like the closest to the truth of all three and stuff, whatever. And I think that it's interesting, like as far as like. Even with Edmund, on a separate note, like he basically is attacking that childlike faith and innocence, basically, and saying you need to get past this and go ahead and grow up. You need to act your age, basically.
And he's obsessed with being like older, and he's trying to act like, oh, that's the thing about those young kids, even though he's 1 year older.
Right, as if by age and as if by that you have a better sense of how the world really is. Yeah. Whereas Lucy, actually has the truth, even though the other three and the other three don't.
Now another apologetic thing that happens there in that scene, I think that's interesting, is that they were saying the stuff about this, like the time being different and stuff, and Professor Diggory says that that's one of the things that I think makes it more believable, is the really uniqueness of the story. Like, I wouldn't be surprised to find that if there was a door to another world, that time ran differently there. But I would be really surprised to find that a little girl made all that up. Yeah. And I just find that interesting. It brought me back to the podcast. Did you guys listen to the podcast where Bishop Barron and Jordan Peterson were talking the other day? And they were talking about the resurrection story, and Peterson's so close there. He was just dwelling on the fact that it doesn't really make sense to think that they would have just made the story up.
Yeah.
And it's something that I found interesting.
Yeah,
there's probably a lot more we could do to talk about that. But moving on, chapter 6, Into the Forest, is just in brief. They're running from Mrs. McCready, who they're scared of, and they all go into the wardrobe this time and find their way into Narnia. And very quickly, Edmund reveals that he's been here before, and they give him crap for it again. And then they find out that Tumnus has been arrested when they go to this place.
Well, Edmund tried to do it cleverly and then tripped himself up, if I'm remembering it correctly.
Yeah,
right?
well, he was like, "Oh, shouldn't we be going
towards
this
the lamp?
way?"
What about towards the lamppost?
And
he
they're like,
specifically says in the
What do you mean
Wait,
the
what?
lamppost? Yeah.
So you've been in here the whole time. And it even says he was trying to be subtle about it, but then realized as soon as that came out that he just busted himself out.
Yeah.
So then, after they've found that Mr. Tumnus has been arrested, they're trying to figure out what they need to do, and deciding that they need to try to figure out some way to save Mr. Tumnus.
Yeah.
And I don't remember which one. Maybe it was Lucy that noticed that there was a robin that was watching them, or seemed to be watching them. And then when they walked towards the robin, it would fly over to another branch, and just sort of did that on and on, like it understood them and was leading them on. And while they're doing that, Edmund is kind of questioning the robin, and how do we know that he's a good bird or whatever? And Peter says,
which will be a repetitive thing that he brings up with every
right.
creature
Yeah, he's starting to question everything. In fact, he questioned Tumnus and said, how do we know he's a good guy? And he could be working for the bad guys or whatever. And Peter was just, he just shut it down. The fawn saved Lucy, so that's the end of the argument there. Now here he says, I'm sure a robin wouldn't be on the wrong side, and he's talking about in stories they're always the good guys. And then Edmund says, if it comes to that, which is the right one? And then he does this whole thing about I know that they say that the White Witch is bad, but we don't know anything about this place. So he just keeps coming back to this questioning, and he's trying to rationalize the fact that he really just wants some Turkish delight.
Yeah.
And that lady gave him some, so she can't really be this bad, can she?
Right.
Anyway.
Well, I don't know. We talked about it earlier, but the way that we just try to justify these things. It's you clearly see Edmund, and I don't know if it's necessarily it could just be Turkish delights. It could also be a little bit of realizing that he made a mistake, so there may be some shame and stuff in there because he's already been called out for what lying about Lucy.
Yeah, hesitancy, being slow to repent.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Slow to admit he's wrong.
Oh yeah, but how do we know? I mean, this could be, and then continue on, right? And how we do that. And I understand that Edmund's a clear, parallel to how we are as humans.
It's interesting in the way that he asks. It's almost like a, did God really say that sort of situation?
Yeah, for sure. How do you know?
Yeah.
And also notice that in defense of his own worldview, he starts calling into question the integrity of everything and everyone around him.
Yeah, the whole world there has to change to his wanting this one thing, basically, to where he's okay.
Yeah.
And justifying it.
Well, how old's Lucy? Do we ever know?
I'm sure.
Or how old's Edmund?
He's a year older than her.
Yeah,
I would just
very
say
young.
like 7 and 8 or something.
Well, I mean, you see this in around Edmund's age is where they'll lie once, and then they know that they have to keep lying because they don't want to get in trouble. Well, and that's just what Edmund does. I mean, he keeps questioning.
It's not just Edmund's age either; it's everyone.
Well,
people
but
have a tendency to
specifically,
do that,
Yeah.
for sure.
but I mean, he's questioning all this because he doesn't want the complete lie to come about and him ultimately just be completely caught in
And he also is probably at this point, and I'm sure the stuff that's happened to this point in the story is only a glimpse of what probably years have been like, but he's not fond of the idea of taking another butt chewing from his brother
Right.
and his sister. So I mean, there's also probably that too. he doesn't want to be the person who screwed up again.
Yeah.
So there's probably a lot of things at work here, all of which, like you said, are relatable, though.
Yeah.
We've all dealt with these feelings to one degree or another.
Yeah. Now, chapter 7, A Day with the Beavers. This is I love the beavers so much.
Mm-hmm.
So they see that someone is moving out there in the woods, and they're trying to figure it out. And he kind of pokes his head out, Mr. Beaver, and starts waving at him to come on. And they're like, see, he's talking to us. This is the first time that we've seen an animal that actually clearly was addressing us. And then he pops back out and is like, come on, and actually talks to him. So they do follow him back to his humble abode, if you will.
They climb on top of the dam, and then they find a house on it.
Yeah.
It says it looks like a beehive or something, or it's like shaped like that or whatever.
Yeah. It's funny how they feel like they're being polite and like complimenting it, and he's being polite and like, oh, it's just.
He's like, oh, basically, oh, it's a work in progress.
Yeah.
Like, this is such a lovely dam you've built, Mr. Beaver.
Yeah. No, what I love in the scene, is that he starts talking to them briefly about they say that Aslan is on the move, and it dwells on the fact that they had never heard Aslan before, but at the name of Aslan, each one of the children felt something jump inside them, and then it lists a few of them and says Edmund
different.
felt a sensation of mysterious horror.
Yeah.
Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous, and then I don't remember what the other two said.
Susan, it said Susan. It felt like it seemed to her like what did it say? It's like it was almost like there was a pleasant aroma on the breeze that swept by, and I can't remember what Lucy's
had something to do with joy. I'm pretty sure, but I could be wrong with that.
or she just something like that.
It's just it's another one. He's baking
but it
in
sticks out for Edmund or whatever. He gets filled with horror. Just like, who is that?
Yeah.
Which is by the way, for modern Christians who are caught up in all the cultural stuff, a sense of horror is actually an appropriate response for somebody who is living in sin and is actually not allegiant, not an ally of Christ.
Right.
Yeah.
So actually, Edmund's response in this is actually appropriate.
Yeah,
Right.
so it says, Peter felt suddenly brave and adventurous. Susan felt as if some delicious smell or some delightful strain of music had just floated by her. And Lucy got the feeling you would have woke up in the morning and realized that it is the beginning of the holidays or the beginning of summer. No one except Edmund felt any difficulty about trusting the beaver now. Oh, wait, that's just talking about the beaver. Where does it say what Edmund thought?
I was just imagining them. It was before the Peter thing, but I just imagine them with Cockney accents, and they're like, "Love Aslan, ate the White Witch." Simple as.
It's funny because they give the audio book that I've been listening to. They give really funny accents to the beavers of like really rural English folk, and it's just beautiful. But real quick on I had something. It's gone. Never mind. Not holding up.
Well, moving into chapter 8, this just runs right into it. What happened after dinner? So they had eaten this nice dinner that was prepared for them by Mr. and Mrs.
That
Beaver.
sounded lovely, by the way, for a bunch of beavers. They
did.
fried trout and they prepared potatoes all different ways.
Yeah.
You've got dessert for them. These beavers know how to throw down.
Yeah, they do. Do beavers have thumbs?
I don't even know, but I was reading it again, and I was like, man, this making me hungry. I think that's when I actually closed it.
It reminds me of whenever they find the note of the arrest warrant in Mr. Tonus's place, and it's by Malgrim, the head of the secret police. He's a wolf, and they're like, who wrote this?
Yeah, exactly.
Did he put the shit in his mouth?
Yeah.
And anyway, so they're starting to talk about. They're talking about Aslan, being on the move and whatnot, and they're like, "So who's Aslan?" And he's just taken aback. Aslan, why don't you know he's the king? He's the lord of the whole wood. And then he goes on later to describe him as the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. I always found the emperor beyond the sea to be this fascinating terminology for it.
Also, always makes me think.
Also, because you don't know what does beyond the sea mean until you get into Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Exactly. Well, to me, it always as well. That's one of those moments where, thematically, you see Lewis and Tolkien kind of touch for a second. Because anytime I think of beyond the sea, I'm so steeped in Tolkien, I always think of west to Valinor, which is the realm of.
And I think he's intentionally calling on that in Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Yeah, it's the realm of the divine.
They went east in.
Yeah. But still the same thing about there's the horizon that you see when you look out at sea or whatever, and that's
beyond
beyond it, that's where God is, kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, then they get into some of the the prophecy rhymes. They have the wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. Oh, it says death. It always agitates me that it doesn't rhyme perfectly. But anyway, so after that, little prophecy or rhyme about Aslan and the end of the 100-year winter.
Yeah.
They're like, wait, so like Aslan, is he safe? And Mr. Beaver again's taken it back. Safe.
It's Lucy specifically.
Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. And that always stuck with me. And more recently, it reminds me of, I know you guys have all listened to Jordan Peterson before. Whenever he talks about the meek shall inherit the earth thing, and something that I had never actually looked into is he was saying that he thought that the actual word there isn't translated very well when it's translated to meek, and it would mean something more like those who have swords but keep them sheathed will inherit the earth. And I went and looked in the Strong Concordance, and I don't remember the exact way to pronounce this, but the word does sort of imply that someone who has strength but keeps it under control. And so it's like it comes back to this just beautifully that like safe. Of course he isn't safe, but he's good.
Yeah. I don't, and obviously it would be a false gospel that would say anything other, as far as like God has called us into comfortability, or has called us into being shy or cowardice, which I think we've talked about this a great deal, and of course this could be a larger conversation, but and I think it's rooted in that bad definition. But cowardice, I think we have an epidemic within the faith of cowardice being disguised as meekness, when that's not at all what God has called us to be. He's called us to be, like Aslan or whatever, where he's not safe at all. There's nothing about him that's safe, and yet he's ultimately good. And that's how we're called to. That's what we're called to strive towards as his followers.
Yeah. I know. So like it being at the fire department and everything, like one of the things that we've tried to put out there is a little bit counter. Maybe not countercultural, but it's a little bit different than what we kind of hear sometimes, is that we should be safety third, right, and not safety first, because there's things that we have to do, right, as men and as fathers, stuff, whatever, that it's not. I mean, it's not the safest thing to go out there and do that, and so it's like if you set yourself up as that it's always safety first, then you're going to hesitate and not do what needs to be done. When our problem tends to be like passiveness, or indifference for sometimes, whatever. So we hesitate not doing what we need to do.
Yeah, and overall, to step in a political landmine, what is the idea of safety first done to the entire country over the last year?
Absolutely.
I mean, I see it with my kid, like with Shepherd. Like, if he's sitting on a rock or stepping on rocks, I'm like, hey, get down. Like, you're going to fall. Because I already know what's going to happen. Like, I've stepped on rocks, I've fallen, but I've also gotten back up. Yeah. Well, I've had to slowly stop telling him to get off things because he needs to learn. Sure. You're going to fall down. You got to get back up.
Yeah, for sure. Lewis actually, in some more of his apologetic work, addressed that issue that you were talking about specifically. Specifically when he's explaining how it doesn't make natural sense for example, the instinct of self-preservation to not be primal. Yeah. When there are obviously situations, or you can just swap that with the term safety. There are obviously situations when one's safety does not take primacy over other issues. And that speaks to kind of what we're talking about or whatever. It's not that
he speaks to that in Mere Christianity.
Yeah, in Mere Christianity, he explains that like these instincts are like keys on a piano, and like which instinct comes in what melody. That's the question, So with that being said, safety is ultimately not something that as the Christ follower we should be too worried with, because ultimately if we just ally ourselves with what we know to be good,
what you ought to do, what he said.
Yeah, what you ought to do. Yeah. Then the rest will work itself out.
Right. Yep. So then we have the whole narrative about there being 4 thrones at Cair Paravel, that are just waiting, and this is what the White Witch knows about and fears, which is why she's out looking for any sons of Adam, daughters of Eve. And you have the little poem, when Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sits at Cair Paravel enthroned, the evil time will be over and done. And this whole thing about the humans being kind of important. And they ask, well, like, isn't the White Witch human? And Mr. Beaver says, she'd like us to believe it, and it's on that she bases her claim to be queen. But she's no daughter of Eve. She comes of your father Adam's. Here Mr. Beaver bowed. Your father Adam's first wife, Lilith. I find it interesting that they threw in the Jewish folklore about Lilith being the first wife of Adam, but they were separated because she wouldn't submit to him, and then she ends up becoming like the mother of demons and stuff like that. And then he elaborates that the White Witch is part jinn and part giant. And I think that like there's a mixture going on there that's sort of like frost giants, clearly.
Yeah, true.
There's also with the jinn being sort of demonic. I think that, and she's gigantic. There's like a clear call to the Nephilim. Going on there. So there's like a Goliath type of figure or whatever. The sons of God looked on the daughters of men, and
and quick thing as well. So during this conversation, at some point, Edmund would have bounced, like he would have left. And one of the reasons why is because, and we didn't actually point this out specifically when we talked about his initial conversation with Jadis on the carriage, but part of the information that she got from him is specifically that he has 3 siblings. So at this point, she has already put together that there are 4 of them there.
Right.
And what Mr. Beaver says right here is just like, oh, as long as she doesn't know that the 4 of you are here, we're all fine.
Right.
I'm guessing it doesn't specifically say, but my instinct is that as soon as he heard that, that's when Edmund left.
Yeah.
Because he had realized then that everything was.
Yeah. When they're trying to recap that and figuring out when he left, they realized that he had asked, like, well, couldn't she turn Aslan to stone? And I totally skipped over, but this thing about she turns people to stone, and then she's kept the place in 100-year winter, and we'll find out, when we get to the magician's nephew, that she essentially froze her entire world in just froze it in time, basically. And this weird thing about her trying to preserve her reign and whatever else that goes with it is an interesting
that is interesting
draw for evil to try to keep things exactly the way they are. Anyway,
maybe a critique of being too conservative with things sometimes, perhaps.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And I don't know this at all, but what it initially made me think of when you said that was that there's a prophecy that's going to come to fruition, but yet she's just trying to freeze everything and stop time, basically, so that it doesn't come.
Will not let go of power or anything like that.
Even though she knows this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so that's the only way I can stop it.
Yep.
I think this might be sort of a Luciferian call to the devil knows that he's not going to win ultimately, but he's still trying to just destroy as much as he can.
Right. Destroy, distract, whatever it can to preserve it. Yeah.
So they follow up that saying that there's no 2 ways about things that look like humans but aren't. And I find it funny that Miss Beaver pipes in and she's like, there's a few dwarves, and Mr. Beaver gives it like that. Well, yes, for the dwarves, some of them I assume are good people. Anyway,
later on, by the way, I love that the dwarves are referred to as the sons of Earth.
Yeah,
son of Earth.
Yeah,
so you have a son of Adam, daughter of Eve, son of Earth.
Yeah.
I thought
So anyway, so Edmund betrays them. They figure that out, and then they realize that they've got to go now, and they're supposed to be meeting Aslan at the stone table. We don't know what the stone table is yet, but they've got to get there, and they've got to move quickly because they're about to be set upon by the White Witch and her secret police, who are wolves, which can run obviously faster than beavers and humans.
Do we know that? No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
I would love to see a beaver just at full gallop.
Well, I don't know if it's in chapter 8 or if it's in because I read through chapter 10. But Mr. and Mrs. Beaver just seem to be nonchalantly, oh yeah, we got 20 minutes. It'll be 15, 20 minutes. We got plenty of time.
Yeah, no, they said that, if he left 30 minutes ago, then we have about 20 minutes until they get here.
That would be fine.
Okay.
In the audiobook I read, they read it with panic. They were like, wait, so that would make them here in about 20 minutes. That's how they. But
yeah, I suppose that would make more
maybe
sense tonally.
Yeah, I guess so.
But I was also, like I said, I was listening.
Yeah,
I could have probably read it that same way, but who knows?
Well, that wraps up the story for where we're at right now. So, any thoughts over what we've gone over so far, overarching commentary, whatever, that we haven't already covered?
Nothing that we haven't already covered. I just, again, would restate that I think it's just super cool to go through these stories again. And like I said, I'm already noticing, I think we've all called out, there are specific themes and things and ideas that Lewis is exploring that are just really cool. Swiftness of forgiveness, the being swift to repent as well, which is a repetitive theme. And then also we're getting some foreshadowing of just the depth of Aslan's forgiveness, of Christ's forgiveness. So it's just super cool to see how awesome these themes are, and it's just cool to see how edifying and just rewarding going through these books are. So I'm super excited to keep going.
Yeah. All right, well, so next time we're actually going to be covering the Valaquinta in the Silmarillion, and then the next time we're back in Lewis, we're going to go over the rest of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is going to be chapters 9 through 17. And I think that about wraps it up. So you want to send us off with your...
With my line?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are the Logosians, and once again, until we meet again, we bid you all a very fond farewell. God bless you guys.